The city's morning was abruptly shattered by a surge of chaos. It all began with the piercing sound of a triggered home alarm and a disturbingly brief 911 call. The voice on the other end was frantic but disjointed, barely offering any details before the line went dead. Authorities responded quickly, their urgency clear as they initiated a door-to-door search in the neighborhood. Officers were urging residents to stay inside, gather their families, and lock their doors. Their tone was tense, hinting at the seriousness of the situation. Inside the home, the scene was grim. Richard Debate was discovered in a state of extreme distress, tied to a chair, his body covered in blood from multiple wounds. As the investigation continued, a more horrifying discovery awaited them in the basement. Connie Debate was found dead. She had been shot twice, once in the back of the head, the second time in the stomach. The cold, calculated nature of the murders sent a chill down the spines of the detectives on the scene. Today, we will look at the photos from this true crime that happened to Connie Margot Debate, 39 years old, who was born and raised in the charming state of Connecticut, USA. From an early age, Connie exhibited a natural curiosity about the world around her, particularly in the areas of social sciences and communications. During her high school years, she actively participated in various activities that allowed her to explore these interests, perhaps laying the foundation for her life's aspirations. Despite this evident curiosity, there is little recorded about any exceptional academic or extracurricular accolades during her youth, which could suggest that her primary focus during those formative years was directed towards cultivating her personal relationships and mapping out her career goals. Connie resided in Connecticut with her husband, Richard Debates, aged 40, and their two young sons, Richard Jr., a bright and spirited 9-year-old, and Connor, an adventurous 6-year-old. The family's home on the quiet tree-lined street of Birchview Drive was a haven of warmth, love, and laughter. Connie's roots traced back to the lively town of Rockville, where she grew up in a bustling household brimming with energy and affection. As the second youngest of 5 siblings, she developed a strong sense of family early on. And as she grew older, her passion for keeping loved ones connected only intensified. Hosting gatherings and throwing lively parties became her signature, a way to ensure the bonds she cherished would never fade. High school reunions were a favorite of hers. She took it upon herself to organize them, often reaching out to former classmates and planning elaborate events to bring everyone together. Connie's personality was magnetic, full of energy, radiating positivity, and perpetually cheerful. Those who knew her spoke fondly of her unwavering willingness to help others. She was the friend who would drop everything to lend an ear, offer advice, or simply show up in times of need. Her dedication to nurturing relationships extended beyond her family and close circle, making her a beloved figure in the community. Her life took a significant turn one summer at a festive gathering, where she met Richard Debates, a computer technician with an infectious sense of humor. At first glance, they seemed like an unlikely match, but as time passed, their complementary personalities became evident. Richard, with his playful and lighthearted demeanor, balanced Connie's boundless energy and knack for organization. Described by friends as a big kid, Richard had a gift for making people laugh, a trait that endeared him to everyone. The couple's shared love for humor and good times solidified their bond, leading to their marriage on July 4th, 2003. Together, they created a life filled with joy and a home brimming with love on the serene street of Birchview Drive. As parents, Connie and Richard made every effort to infuse magic into their children's lives. Connie, ever the creative spirit, took pride in orchestrating elaborate celebrations that delighted her family and friends. Halloween, Christmas, Easter. Every holiday was an opportunity for her to go all out. One memorable Easter, she convinced the children that planting jelly beans in the garden would result in a surprise the next morning. As her sons slept, she painstakingly gathered the jelly beans and replaced them with lollipops, ensuring their delight when they awoke. By December 23rd, 2015, the holiday season was in full swing, and the Debates' home was a picture of festive cheer. The house was adorned with twinkling lights, garlands, and carefully wrapped gifts under the tree. Connie, eager for the upcoming celebrations, spent the morning getting her sons ready for school while Richard took charge of the drop-off. Returning home, he prepared for a typical workday as Connie got ready for a late morning spin class. It seemed like an ordinary day, filled with the routine rhythms of family life. However, just before 11 a.m., the tranquility was shattered. Neighbors, accustomed to the quiet hum of suburban life, were jolted by the sudden wail of sirens and the sight of police vehicles racing toward the debate's residence. Startled residents peered out from their windows, witnessing a flurry of activity as law enforcement converged on the house. The commotion stemmed from a triggered home alarm and a chillingly brief 911 call. Whispers of a home invasion quickly spread throughout the neighborhood, fueling fear and speculation. Police, responding with urgency, began a door-to-door sweep, advising residents to gather their families, lock their doors, and remain hidden. Anxiety gripped the tight-knit community as people huddled together, awaiting further instructions. The tension was palpable as officers moved swiftly to secure the area. Inside, the home scene was grim. Richard was discovered in a state of distress, tied to a chair and bleeding from multiple wounds. He had been violently attacked but was alive. Paramedics worked urgently to stabilize him before rushing him to the hospital. Meanwhile, the search of the home led to a devastating discovery in the basement. Connie was found lifeless, the victim of a brutal attack. She had been shot twice, once in the back of the head and once in the stomach. The calculated nature of the crime left investigators shaken. As detectives pieced together the events, they assured residents that the perpetrator had fled the scene, allowing the neighborhood to slowly emerge from its lockdown. The aftermath was surreal. The quiet street was now a hive of activity, with yellow crime scene tape cordoning off the debate's home, police lights casting an eerie glow, and officers meticulously gathering evidence. In the days that followed, attention turned to Richard, who had survived. Once he was stable enough, nurses said detectives could come and interview him. He was shaken and in shock, but recounted everything he could remember about the events of that fateful morning. Richard explained that his day had started like any other. He left the house promptly at 8 a.m. to drop the kids off at school. After completing, he returned home around 8:30 a.m. to change into his work shirt. As he stepped inside, he noticed Connie getting ready for her spin class at the local YMCA, dressed in her gym clothes and backing her car out of the driveway. Everything seemed normal at that moment, but it was just the calm before the storm. Connie's class at the YMCA had been unexpectedly canceled, so she returned home sooner than planned. Meanwhile, Richard began his 40-minute commute to work. About 10 minutes into his drive, he realized he had forgotten his laptop at home. A rare lapse for someone as meticulous as him. With no choice but to retrieve it, he turned his car around, heading back to the house. As he drove, a notification popped up on his phone from the alarm system, alerting him that it had been triggered. Concerned, Richard quickly emailed his boss to inform him that he would be late to work and sped home to check on the situation. Richard estimated that he arrived back at the house sometime between 8:45 and 9 a.m. Stepping inside, he immediately felt a sense of unease. The house was eerily quiet, but as he made his way upstairs, a faint noise caught his attention. Carefully, he ascended the stairs and discovered a tall man wearing camouflage clothing and a ski mask rummaging through Connie's jewelry box. The sight was terrifying. The intruder turned abruptly, wielding a knife, and demanded money, credit cards, and PIN numbers. Richard, in a desperate bid to de-escalate the situation, handed over his wallet without hesitation. Richard's memory of what happened next was fragmented, a blur of fear and chaos. He recalled hearing Connie's car pulling into the driveway and yelling for her to run. Instead of fleeing, Connie seemed to head directly into the basement. Richard assumed she was trying to retrieve one of the two guns they kept in the house, one locked in the basement, the other in their bedroom closet. Seconds later, the intruder dashed downstairs after her. Moments of harrowing silence were followed by two deafening gunshots at precisely 9 a.m. Richard's heart sank as he realized the unimaginable might have happened. Overwhelmed by panic, Richard ran to the basement, only to find his worst fears confirmed. Connie lay motionless on the ground, her life cruelly taken by a gunshot to the stomach and another to the back of her head. The intruder stood over her, clutching one of their guns. In a chilling turn, the man attacked Richard, stabbing him repeatedly in the legs with a box cutter. He then tied Richard to a chair with zip ties and took out a blowtorch. Richard's survival instincts kicked in, and in a moment of desperation, he managed to grab the blowtorch and aim it at the attacker, burning the man's face. The intruder, now injured, fled the scene, leaving Richard bound and bleeding. Using every ounce of strength, Richard, still tied to the chair, and managed to activate the panic button linked to their home alarm system. He also placed a brief 911 call, his voice trembling as he tried to convey the horrors that had just unfolded. The story he relayed to authorities was harrowing, almost too wild to believe, leaving detectives unsure of where to begin their investigation. Detectives first canvassed the neighborhood, speaking to neighbors and anyone who might have noticed something unusual that morning. They also interviewed Connie and Richard's friends, searching for any leads. During these conversations, it came to light that the couple had been embroiled in a dispute with a contractor in the months leading up to the tragedy. Dissatisfied with work performed on their home, they had sued the contractor for several $1,000s. After the lawsuit, tensions escalated. One of their cars had its windshield smashed, and Connie grew increasingly anxious. Though she had always been apprehensive about firearms, her growing sense of unease led them to purchase guns for protection. The contractor in question, a man named Ken, admitted to harboring resentment over the lawsuit but vehemently denied any involvement in the crime. He described the ordeal as something he had tried to forget, likening it to a bad dream. Detectives initially found his history with the Debates family compelling, but soon uncovered details that cast doubt on his culpability. Ken willingly cooperated with their investigation, allowing them to search his devices and photograph him. Moreover, his physical description, height, build, and voice, did not align with Richard's account of the masked intruder. Given his solid alibi and lack of a criminal record, Ken was eventually ruled out as a suspect. As Christmas turned into the last days of December, the investigation continued, and the authorities were determined to piece together the mystery. Meanwhile, the town of Ellington prepared to bid farewell to Connie. Her wake drew hundreds of mourners, a testament to the profound impact she had on the community. Despite freezing temperatures, people stood in line for hours to pay their respects and offer condolences to Richard and the couple's children. Among those in attendance were Connie's two best friends of over 20 years. They were struck by an unsettling realization as they spoke with Richard during the funeral. "How do you know my wife?" Richards asked, his face blank and his tone oddly detached. The friends exchanged confused glances but chose to chalk it up to the immense stress he must have been under. Still, something about the encounter unsettled them, and later, as they reflected on the day, they couldn't shake the observation. There wasn't a single mark on him. No bruises, no scratches, nothing. Adding to the growing unease, Richard left the funeral unusually early, even before many of Connie's closest family members. For a grieving husband, his actions seemed uncharacteristic, leaving many attendees whispering in hushed tones. Despite the passing of 2 weeks, the police had yet to make an arrest in Connie's murder. The lack of progress in the investigation frustrated both the family and the community. Detectives were methodical, waiting for lab results to come back and working tirelessly to piece together the evidence. They knew they needed to ensure every detail was accounted for before drawing any conclusions. But the delays only heightened the tension in Ellington, where rumors about Richard's behavior had begun circulating. In the days following Connie's death, Richard's behavior became a hot topic of conversation. Neighbors saw him dining out, laughing with friends, and even hosting gatherings at the same home where his wife had been brutally murdered. His social media posts added fuel to the fire. In one, he claimed he was staying strong for his boys and thanked the community for their support. While grief manifests differently for everyone, many found Richard's casual demeanor deeply unsettling. "If you didn't know his story," one neighbor remarked, "you'd have no idea he'd just lost his wife." Even those closest to Connie began questioning Richard's version of events, and the detectives took note. Back at Birchview Drive, the investigation progressed painstakingly slowly. The suburban neighborhood, with its sprawling lawns and wide spacing between homes, provided few witnesses. None of the neighbors reported seeing or hearing anything suspicious on the morning of the crime. Inside the DeBates home, there were no obvious signs of forced entry, but investigators noticed that the basement window had been left slightly ajar. Could this have been the intruder's entry point? Yet, puzzlingly, nothing in the house appeared to be disturbed or stolen. The canine units brought in to track the intruder's scent were equally baffled. One dog repeatedly returned to Richard in the ambulance, while two others failed to pick up any trail leaving the property. Even Richard's claim that his wallet had been stolen didn't hold up. The wallet was found outside the house with all its contents intact. The physical evidence presented a confounding picture. The gun used in the crime, kept in the basement, bore no fingerprints, not Connie's, not Richard's, and not the alleged intruders. Richard's injuries, while dramatic at first glance, were deemed superficial by nurses who treated him. Small cuts and scratches from a knife seemed inconsistent with the violent encounter he described. And as detectives spoke with Richard, his account of the morning grew increasingly inconsistent. At first, he insisted he had heard Connie get shot. Later, he claimed he had seen it happen. Then, in another version, he admitted he hadn't seen or heard anything. His timeline also shifted. Initially, he said the attack began just before 9 a.m., with Connie being shot 5 minutes later. But the 911 call wasn't made until nearly 10:30 a.m., leaving a glaring gap of unaccounted time. On Christmas Eve, just one day after Connie's murder, Richard retained a high-profile defense attorney. A week later, he filed a claim for Connie's $475,000 life insurance policy and withdrew $93,000 from an investment account in her name. To outsiders, these actions seemed calculated, fueling suspicions about his potential involvement in the crime. As investigators dug deeper, a troubling picture of Richard and Connie's marriage began to emerge. Though they appeared to be the perfect suburban couple, cracks in their relationship had been forming long before Connie's death. In December 2014, Connie had started a note on her iPhone titled, "Why I Want a Divorce." In it, she detailed Richard's financial irresponsibility and his emotional neglect. "He takes money from a lot of accounts that don't belong to him," she wrote. "He says he's sorry but takes no responsibility for it. I don't know anything about his day, who he speaks to, or what goes on in his life other than work. I'm tired of covering for him. I'm tired of lying and acting like things are great when they aren't." In the reasons to stay in her marriage section of the note, Connie's conflicted feelings were evident. "People like him when he is in a great mood," she wrote. "He is fun to be around. I still find him attractive." The note painted a complex portrait of a woman torn between love and frustration, yearning for a life free from the mounting stress of her marriage. Detectives, keeping their investigation under wraps, had been quietly building their case. From their very first interview with Richard at the hospital, they'd suspected his involvement. Richard's tangled web of deceit began unraveling as investigators delved deeper into his personal life. It came to light that he had been involved in a long-term, on-again, off-again affair with a woman named Sarah, someone he had known since their high school days. Sarah was no stranger to Connie either. She had been close enough to the couple to give a reading at their wedding, a detail that now added a bitter irony to the entire situation. Richard and Sarah's relationship had reignited in May 2015, and by June of that year, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. Allegedly, she pressured Richard to leave Connie and start a new life with her. Richard's affair wasn't initially uncovered by investigators, but was instead volunteered by him during a 7-hour interview at the hospital. He admitted to detectives that he and Sarah had been in a sexual relationship, though he attempted to frame the situation in a peculiar way. According to Richard, Sarah had approached both him and Connie, asking for their help in having a child. She claimed to want a baby, but struggled with the financial burden of doing so through medical procedures. Richard stated that Connie had agreed to this arrangement, even co-signing the plan. "We were going to donate sperm to her to have a kid. Richard said. "But because of the cost of doing this through doctors, we decided to do it." And here he hesitated before adding, "in the conventional way." Detectives pressed him further. "So, Connie knew you were trying to get Sarah pregnant?" "Yes," he replied firmly. This story was met with skepticism by the investigators, and their doubts only deepened when they uncovered a contradictory narrative. Friends of Richard revealed that he had admitted Sarah's pregnancy was unintentional and the result of an affair. Under questioning, Richard offered yet another version of events, claiming that Connie, unable to have another child herself, had wanted Sarah to serve as a surrogate. He even suggested that all three of them had agreed to co-parent the child. Detectives, unconvinced by this improbable tale, pushed harder, and Richard eventually confessed that the pregnancy was indeed accidental and that the affair had lasted for over a month. Richard had begun lying to Connie about his whereabouts, claiming to be working late or out with friends when he was actually with Sarah. To Sarah, he painted a very different picture, professing his love for her and assuring her he was on the verge of divorcing Connie. However, his actions told a different story. In late 2015, Richard took Connie on a romantic trip to Vermont. When Connie shared photos of the trip on Facebook, Sarah saw them and realized Richard had been lying about his intentions to leave his wife. Whether or not Connie had any knowledge of the affair remains uncertain. Friends close to her strongly believed she would have confided in someone if she had known. However, evidence suggested that Richard's mounting lies and entanglements may have led him to view Connie as an obstacle to be removed. In June 2015, Richard had even consulted a divorce attorney but had not filed any paperwork. 2 days before Connie's murder, Richard sent a text to Sarah, promising he would leave his wife. A day later, he sent another message, telling Sarah he loved her and would see her the next day. Meanwhile, Connie's phone showed a tense conversation between her and Richard. On the day before her death, she accused him of lying, texting, "You lied to me, and I am again cleaning up your mess. Great day off? And Merry Christmas." Richard's reply was chilling in hindsight. "It will be a very Merry Christmas." The revelations didn't stop there. Investigators discovered that Richard had been using a secret credit card to lavish Sarah with gifts, pay for hotel stays, and even spend over $1,000 at a strip club. Internet searches on his devices included terms like deadly over-the-counter combinations, raising further suspicions. Yet the most damning evidence was still to come. By Christmas 2016, and well into the spring of 2017, police were meticulously piecing together a timeline using data from Connie's smartwatch, CCTV footage, and alarm system logs. Connie, an avid user of her smartwatch, wore it religiously, even on the day she was killed. This device, coupled with other digital evidence, painted a starkly different picture from the one Richard had given to authorities. According to Richard's account, he had left for work early that morning and was driving when the tragedy unfolded. However, Connie's smartwatch recorded her movements, showing that she was active well past the time Richard claimed she had been killed. Furthermore, house alarm data revealed that Richard was still at home at 8:26 and 8:27 a.m., actively using Facebook on his computer. This directly contradicted his claim that he had been driving to work during that time. At 8:41 a.m. on the morning of Connie's murder, a login to Outlook.com was recorded from Richard's home computer. This action directly contradicted Richard's claims of being away from the house at that time. Between 8:45 and 9 a.m., Richard told investigators he had returned home to encounter the intruder, followed shortly by Connie's arrival and her tragic death. Yet at 8:46 a.m., Connie's smartwatch confirmed she had left for her scheduled spin class at the YMCA. This data painted a very different picture from Richard's story. Just 1 minute after Connie's departure, Richard logged into the home alarm system. He attempted to disable it at 8:47 a.m., succeeding by 8:50 a.m., but reactivated it moments later. At 8:59 a.m., he disarmed the system again using his keychain fob, indicating he remained at the property. Meanwhile, Connie arrived at the YMCA at 8:53 a.m. and sent a Facebook message to her therapist shortly thereafter, further confirming her whereabouts. At 9 a.m., Richard emailed his work supervisor, claiming he sent the email while pulled over in his car. However, digital forensic analysis proved the email originated from his home IP address, yet another strike against his credibility. By 9 a.m., Connie left the YMCA and returned to her car. At 9:18 a.m., Richard accessed the YMCA's website, seemingly attempting to track her activities. At 9:23 a.m., Connie's smartwatch registered activity as the garage door at the house opened. Between 9:40 and 9:46 a.m., she was observed active on Facebook, further confirming her movements and dispelling Richard's claims of her death occurring much earlier. It seemed Richard was stalling for time, possibly trying to orchestrate a way to lure Connie into the basement. Connie's smartwatch recorded her final movements at 10 a.m., with her heart rate and activity abruptly ceasing. At 10:12 a.m., the home's alarm was activated using Richard's keychain fob, marking the moment he initiated his staged narrative. Despite his insistence of an intruder, the forensic data showed Connie's death occurred nearly an hour after Richard initially claimed, and her movements prior to her demise did not align with any attempt to flee an attacker. The data undermined every part of Richard's timeline. Finally, in April 2017, Richard was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife, more than a year after her tragic death. The arrest marked a significant breakthrough in a case that had captivated the local community and beyond. A 50-page arrest warrant detailed what investigators had uncovered about the debate's marriage, the inconsistencies in Richard's story, and the overwhelming evidence against him. Richard faced charges of murder, tampering with evidence, and providing false statements to law enforcement. Held initially under a $1 million bond, Richard's attorney issued a statement asserting his client's innocence, claiming he would be vindicated at trial. Despite the severity of the charges, Richard posted bail and was released pending trial. More tragedy struck the debate's family in 2019, when Connie's father passed away after a prolonged illness. He had been determined to see justice for his daughter, holding on for as long as he could. Connie's brother expressed sorrow that their father's body finally gave out before seeing Richard held accountable. The grief compounded the family's sense of loss as they awaited closure that seemed endlessly delayed. Richard's trial was originally scheduled for April 2020, but the global pandemic disrupted the proceedings. Further delays occurred when Richard's defense attorney passed away, requiring the appointment of new representation. These setbacks pushed the trial back by 2 years. Finally, in April 2022, the long-awaited trial began, over 6 years after Connie's murder. The now former detective took the witness stand and testified before the jurors, explaining that Richard Debates had willingly provided law enforcement with consent to conduct a thorough search of his home in Ellington. This search included a detailed examination of his iPhone, a request for DNA swabs, and the collection of gunshot residue samples. In addition to the defendant's cooperation, the prosecution introduced a considerable amount of physical evidence, which included photographs of Richard Debates' injuries taken while he was hospitalized. Also presented were various items of clothing found on him, such as his blood-stained shoe, which further implicated him in the case. In total, the prosecution submitted an astounding 600 pieces of evidence during the trial. Additionally, over 130 witnesses, including Richard Debates himself, were called to testify. Richard's legal defense team vehemently argued that law enforcement had focused their efforts solely on him from the outset, accusing them of tunnel vision. The protection highlighted certain pieces of crucial forensic evidence, such as unknown DNA discovered at the crime scene, which they asserted could be linked to that killed Connie. They also presented testimony from a house cleaner who claimed to have seen a dark figure moving near the window of the Debates house on the night in question, though this was somewhat speculative. Despite this, the prosecutors depicted Richard as a man spiraling out of control. They argued that Richard killed Connie because he was terrified of the repercussions a divorce would have on his public image. Furthermore, he was deeply concerned about the financial fallout, the looming custody battle over their 2 sons, RJ and Connor, and the potential damage to his social standing. 4 weeks into the trial, a key witness took the stand, one of Connie's sisters. She revealed that the family had only learned that Connie had been shot the day after her death, during a family meeting held at their parents' home. Richard Debates had been present at the meeting. According to the sister, when Richard arrived, he immediately uttered, "I didn't do it. There was someone in the house. They said, I need a lawyer." She also recalled that Richard appeared physically ill and distraught, as though he had been crying. She claimed that he had difficulty entering the house, adding a sense of unease to the situation. In that emotional family gathering, Richard explained to them, in a seemingly detached manner, what had transpired. He told them he had hired a lawyer who advised him to refrain from speaking further, but Richard felt compelled to provide them with an explanation of what had occurred. Connie's sister, alongside her brother-in-law who also testified, noted Richard's lack of emotional response as he shared the story of the tragic event. 7 residents of the Ellington neighborhood where the crime occurred were called to testify, but their testimonies were inconclusive. They stated they had seen nothing unusual or out of place on the day of the incident. As the trial progressed, the judge indicated that they were hopeful to conclude the prosecution's case by midweek, with no court scheduled for the following day. Richard himself took the stand in his own defense. He admitted that he had been in love with both Connie and his lover, Sarah, and that he had felt trapped in an untenable situation. However, he staunchly denied that this complicated personal life had any bearing on the murder. Richard confessed to the affair, but argued that this alone should not be used as evidence of his guilt. He insisted that he missed Connie dearly every day and would never have harmed her, particularly because of his love for their sons. Sarah, the other woman involved in his affair, also testified. She tearfully expressed that she never intended to break up Richard's family. In fact, she explained, she had been willing to raise their daughter alone and had even considered not putting Richard's name on the birth certificate if he chose to stay with Connie. Sarah said she felt deep shame and embarrassment over the entire situation, but she categorically denied ever pressuring Richard to leave his wife. After 5 weeks of intense legal proceedings, both the prosecution and defense rested their cases. The jury deliberated for a remarkably short period, likely no more than 3 hours, before reaching a verdict. In May 2022, Richard Debates was found guilty on all counts related to the murder of his wife, Connie. Richard's defense team remains resolute in their commitment to fight for their client's innocence, and they have made it clear that they are prepared to continue their legal battle for as long as it takes. In October of the year following his sentencing, Richard appealed against his conviction, seeking a fresh chance to prove his innocence. His defense attorney, an experienced and tenacious lawyer, stood before a panel of 6 justices in a high-stakes appeal hearing. Despite these efforts, the appeal was swiftly rejected, with the justices upholding the original conviction. Richard Debates had been sentenced to an extraordinary 65 years in prison after being convicted of the brutal and chilling murder of his wife, Connie Debate.